Start recording. Okay. All right. Now, some of these things we discussed in second year when we did some aspects of seed technology. We started to talk about seed science. It was seed science behind science, science behind seeds. And actually, we discussed seed technology and what seed technology is all about. All right. If you recall, based on a definition we discussed in year 2, seed technology is defined as the method through which the genetic and physical characteristics of seeds could be improved. And another definition was its involvement in such activities as variety development, evaluation, and release of seed production, seed processing, seed storage, seed testing, seed certification, seed quality control, and seed marketing, and some other aspects. All right. At the end of today, I want us to discuss a few of these questions. All right. And I want the class to be interactive. So if you all have any questions throughout the class, you could just put up your hand or just put on your mic and start asking me whatever question. All right. So what are some of the conditions that must be met for a seed to successfully germinate and grow into a viable seedling? All right. So we'll be discussing some of those aspects. What are the advantages of propagating annual vegetables in a greenhouse or similar climate control structure compared to direct seeding crops? Now, I won't get into the details of that because I understand Dr. Daly is supposed to come and talk about different types of greenhouse structures with you all. And I guess when he's talking about the propagation facilities design and plant nursery selection and all those things, he will get into the nitty-gritty of all that. All right. The third thing we want to be able to do is to describe the optimal environmental conditions for the germination and growth of annual vegetables. What are the characteristics of seedlings when ready for transplanting to the field or the garden? And what are some of the actions growers may take to prepare seedlings for the transplanting into the field? All right, that whole concept of acclimatization or acclimation, as some books will refer to it as, or what you all know as hardening. All right, and what is the most effective way to manage or prevent the development of pests and diseases in propagation facilities. All right. Now, you may recall some of these slides from here too, when we did seed technology. All right. The question was asked here is asked, what we really want to get from our seeds? All right. We have to remember that in sexual propagation, it all begins with a seed. All right. The important thing as growers, we want to get, and as farmers, we want to make sure that we have uniformity in the field. All right, we want to ensure that we have successful establishment in our fields. All right, and of course, in a monoculture field, we'll want to see everything at the same height. All right, or everything looking nicely arranged like this. All right, and of course, this will enable us to do a number of other practices. Weed management, for example, all right, even up to the harvesting, it will make harvesting much easier if everything is uniform, all right? And of course, we wouldn't want to see something like this, all right, which is mainly weedy crops, all right? Because what weeds do, they harbor pests and diseases, and of course, these are unacceptable, all right? So, if we recall, under sexual propagation, a most basic definition of sexual propagation is the intentional reproduction of a new generation of plants by the germination and growth of seeds that were created in the previous generation through the fertilization of a plant ovary via the union of male and female sex cells. All right, and this will result in a uniquely genetically unique plant generation. Right, and this slide is basically showing you that there are different types of seeds that are usually grown. There are annuals, biennials, and perennials. And if you recall from when we did weed science last year, annuals are very prolific. They produce a number of seeds, and this is a survival strategy, a survival mechanism, where a lot of them produce a lot of seeds, all right? And remember, they have, in addition to that, they have several modes of dissemination, be it cross dissemination with insects or with wind, using water or whatever. All right, so you also have the biennials. They produce a number of seeds as well, but not as many as the annuals. And the perennials now, because they have the additional perinating organs, which you will find things like runners. I don't know if you'll ever observe how mint grows. Mint grows, it has a number of runners and it could grow for a long period of time. I never observed that with tarragon because I never really grew tarragon, but things like, and this is just herbs mainly they are referring to here. And lavender and all those things, they are considered perennials, all right? And they don't really have perinating organs. Whoever's mic is that, if you could turn on your mic, I'll appreciate it. All right. They don't have perinating organs per se, but what they are mainly, they are runners. All right, and that is considered a type of perinatus because each node at each node, it could root at each node, right? And then you could have little plantlets being formed. All right. Now, what is important to note about the seed also is that there are different types of seeds, and basically you would have come across the term open pollinated versus hybrid seeds. All right, now the majority of our farmers in the developing countries, what they do is save seeds. However, in the case of Trinidad, we have done a study a couple of years ago. I had 2 students do a final year study where they observed not only with farmers, but mainly with farmers, that farmers no longer save seeds because it's not economic for them. All right, what they do is they purchase seedlings, all right, from agricultural shops. If they purchase seeds at all, it will be mainly hybrid seeds, all right, because this is a business for all the farmers, all right, and it's more so with the larger farmers, the middle to larger farmers, than with the small farmers. You'll find the whole practice of saving seeds more with the small farmers, all right. And in this study, what they found also, we actually came across a gentleman in the Princeton area who has, he's into the seed saving business, where he has actually farmers working with him, and they actually save seeds and they sell it to him, all right? Or so he buys it from them and then he sells it back through nurseries to them and to other farmers as well. All right, now his whole objective is to make sure that the land races, and as a next term you will come across, I mean, we discussed this in year 2, and we looked at plant propagation resources, plant resources, right? We looked at land races and things like heirlooms and all those things. All right, now for open pollinated varieties, those are the ones that's really considered like the land races and all those things and the heirlooms. All right, so they are considered more of a natural type of seed, right? And you will find a lot of the ones that are marketed in the United States now, not the really commercial ones, they are the ones that are marketed as organic, they are really open pollinated. They're supposed to be open pollinated varieties. All right, and so they are comprised of seeds developed through natural breeding processes with a bit of minimal interference from breeders. All right. I'll give you a couple examples of what we have on the farm. We have as an open pollinated variety, we have the UW7. UW7 is a open pollinated sweet corn variety, and we also have the Icta farm corn, which is it's a field corn, again open pollinated. All right. So based on this whole concept of open, it means that the varieties will openly receive pollen from other compatible varieties that are nearby, all right? Or they can probably self-seed, all right? And we find out that self-seeding mechanism or self-pollinating mechanism a lot with peas, all right? a lot of the peas plants, like the pigeon peas and all those things, you don't find much cross-pollination with that. All right, so breeders may step in at any point in time and they may choose which plants they want to stock and crossbreed. All right, so there is some level of interference. All right, because for example, our UW7, the sweet corn, we did some interference. All right, we developed this with actually 2 lines, but then we stabilized it over a period of time. Right now, because of cross-pollination taking place with the other variety, we have to try to see if we could purify the line. All right, so the open pollinated seed results in offspring which are closely resembling the previous generation. Okay, now and then you may find a little mutations taking place. All right, so self-pollinated populations, it usually occurs with cross-pollinated populations. And there are a number of advantages and disadvantages to this as well. All right, if I could talk about some of the pros and the cons. All right, in terms of the pros for open pollinated varieties, you have more natural method of seed breeding. It maintains the heirloom varieties that have significant cultural or other value. All right, and a case in point, I could talk about the Moruga red, the red rice, the Moruga red rice. All right, I think in Moruga they also have a red corn variety or purple corn. I'm not too sure if you all are familiar with it at all. All right, and that is also considered a landrace. So you also have as a pro more genetic diversity in each seed. All right, and the seeds from these varieties can be saved and replanted by growers and even lead to a more desirable variety. All right, so as I told you before, for the UW7, we're trying to see if we could purify the line. And in so doing, we have to go through, when we plant it out, we have to go through and make sure that we observe the cubs, look for those that have the characteristics, because we have developed a whole key of key characteristics for the UW7. Remember, this is a variety that could be harvested in about 75 days. And I'm not too sure if you observed the arrangement of the corn on the cob itself. It is nicely arranged. All right, all the corn grains are nicely arranged. All right, and there are a number of other characteristics that we have with it. For example, it is to some extent impenetrable to the borer, all right, as compared with the Icta farm corn, which is a little more susceptible to the borer, all right, and you all should be familiar with the corn borer that affects the corn, because we planted corn last semester for a couple courses. I remember you all for your year 2 course, and I think you all had some issues with it, all right, even over the practical skills. What are some of the disadvantages of using the open pollinated? More diversity means less predictable seed. All right, and sometimes you may have different sizes and different maturity times. And we have observed this especially with a next variety that we developed, which is the UW10. It's a dwarf pigeon pea variety. You all may not be familiar with that because we sort of lost the line over the years. We had done a lot of work on it. Well, not we, I should say, but Professor Umaharan, he's the one who actually developed that line. It was developed for, it is not a daylight sensitive variety. Yes, it's open pollinated, but it was bred for ease of harvesting. So you will observe that it's a dwarf variety, it's very short. It matures in about 3 months and you could grow it year round. All right, it doesn't just come around December time when you have shorter days. All right, so it's not daylight sensitive. And the other thing that you observe with it too is that the pods are to the top for ease of harvesting. All right, the difficulty with it too, and another reason that the consumers didn't really like it is that the maturity sort of varied from time to time. All right, today you will get on the same bunch, it's not really a bunch, on the same, wherever you have the pigeon pea being developed, you will have them maturing at different times. All right, so you're not going to get, so that means you really cannot do mechanical harvesting with that variety. All right, so that sometimes could be a little disadvantage. So yields both strong and weak individuals from the seed stock. All right, as I told you, with our UW7, we observe that quite a lot. We have sometimes you will see some things that are really true to type, and that's the next thing about open pollinated varieties. They are all true to type. They all come out sometimes like their parent plant. Sometimes you may have that recessive gene that may lead to the weaker individuals in the seed stock. All right. Process of coming up with specific strong and new varieties takes a little more time, and then controlling the genetics when producing open pollen seed is sometimes a little more challenging. All right. With the hybrids, on the other hand, hybrids have more of a wider appeal. And as I told you that with our farmers here, they prefer, because sometimes you see these beautiful packages of seeds, F1 seeds and F1 hybrids, that is, and they show beautiful, for example, sweet pepper. I don't know if you're all familiar with jade sweet pepper. It's a nice blocky, large, solid sweet pepper. All right. Farmers, a lot of farmers, they are very much attracted to that. And some of them have disease resistance. All right. Because what you'll notice about a lot of the hybrid varieties, they are product of the cross-pollination of two different varieties. All right. Two different breeds. But homogeneous, inbred, stable lines. And they themselves have a number of advantages and disadvantages. All right, when you talk about the disadvantages for these, some of them, some of their pros or advantages, they are more predictable seed due to the genetic similarity from seed to seed. All right. Now, when I talk about predictable, that means only for the first generation, you're going to find that you could predict and know that it will be what you get on the package. All right, what you see on the package. All right, it yields only strong individuals with desired traits due to the similar seeds. All right, and the F1 yields immediate improvements in the first generation. And then controlling that F1 genetics in most cases can be easier, all right, and less costly. However, the thing about most of these hybrid varieties, and I'm now going to the cons of it, the disadvantages. The thing about it is ever so often, about every 5 to 10 years, plant breeders have to develop and strengthen the hybrids a little more, all right, because you start to get erosion, genetic erosion taking place, and all the genetic material starts to go down, all right, so that they have to be constantly working on improving varieties from time to time. Okay, so that is a major disadvantage. So the standard amount of time sometimes is about 8 to 10 years, all right, to develop new lines. So you have less natural method of seed breeding. All right, because you understand what happens if I decide to save seeds from a hybrid variety. I'm going to get a breakdown in the genetic material. All right, I'm going to get from the two parent plants, I'm going to get characteristics from both of them. I'm not saying that you cannot save seeds. Yes, you can save seeds from hybrid varieties, but it would not be true to type as it would be with open pollinated varieties. All right, so the seed breeds may not have significant cultural value. All right, because they're not heirlooms, all right? But most of our farmers in Trinidad have lost that whole culture of seed saving, and the whole thing about heirlooms and those things, it don't really mean anything much to them. Of course, it will mean things to the people in Moruga for their red rice and for their corn varieties, all right? We have, in Trinidad here, we have done some work, a lot of work here at the university in development of different crops. But there was one of our colleagues some years ago, his name was Professor Phelps, and he actually worked with a seed company, I think it was Pioneer, all right, and he developed a variety of tomatoes called Calypso. You all could do some research on the Calypso. Now, I'm not too sure if we still get Calypso in Trinidad, but it has been, I think we actually, the last thing I heard of Calypso is that we could get it out of the Dominican Republic, all right? But just bear in mind that it's something that was actually developed here by one of our own. At the time he was working at CADI, all right? CADI was working a little more with us here at the university. Right, so let's get back to some basics on what a seed is, all right? Again, you may be familiar with this slide because I showed it in year 2. All right, just to recap, seed, what is a seed? Is a mature fertilized plant ovule consisting of an embryo and its food source and having a protective coat or tester. All right, it's a fertilized, could also be defined as a fertilized ovule of a plant that contains an embryo and food products for germination. And once germinated, the embryo can grow into a mature individual. And finally, a propagule capable of withstanding unfavorable conditions and germinating when conditions for seedling growth are favorable. All right. Right, for the whole germination process to take place. All right, and you know germination is a critical step to achieve economic success in a planting, in any transplanting operation. All right. So, and it's so important for farmers. Right, so for germination process to take place, the seeds must be first of all viable. All right, I hope you'll recall that we discussed different ways of determining viability and the vigor, as opposed to the vigor of the seedling. All right, it must also be subjected to various appropriate environmental conditions. And what are some of these conditions, these environmental conditions? Anybody could turn on their mic and say. This is basically light, water. So light in some instances. All right, light is necessary for some very small seeded crops. Lettuce, for example, it needs light to break that dormancy, because as the last point notes here, primary dormancy condition must be overcome. All right, the whole reason for the seeds to be in quiescence is the fact that it is dormant. All right, and remember what dormancy is. It's a cessation of any activity, right, until you have the stimulus, which is the appropriate environmental conditions, which is light, water, nutrients, and whatever else is needed. In terms of a scientific definition of germination, and this is based on the agricultural, this is the Association of Seed Analysts, right? They belong to a body of International Seed Testing Association. Okay, and this is their definition: the emergence and development from the seed embryo of those essential structures which are indicative of the ability to produce a normal plant under favorable conditions. And if you recall, when we discussed how the whole thing about seed testing, all right, remember we said that there are two tests that are usually done. There's the seed viability test and the seed vigor test. One is done based on the inefficiencies of the other, all right? So that with the germination test, there are some limitations, and those limitations are usually addressed by the seed vigor test that are done. All right, necessary conditions for seed germination are viability, and then physical, chemical dormancy factors must be broken. Okay, in some instances we have to do things like scarification, soaking of the seeds. Sometimes we have to and then scarification. There are different types of scarification. If you recall, we have the physical scarification, where you actually have to come and file the seeds. There are some instances like seeds of the Nasturtium family, for example, you have to actually file the seeds. All right, some of them you have to put in a container and shake, all right, so that you can break that seed tester, because remember that seed tester is what sometimes initiate the dormancy, that physical dormancy, all right. Sometimes exposure to soil microorganisms, that's of course dependent on the species needs, all right. So all of these things must be broken: physical dormancy and sometimes chemical dormancy, which is the internal chemical metabolic conditions that prevent seed germination until appropriate environmental conditions have been met through things like leaching, cold moist stratification, fire stratification, and depending on the species needs, all right? Right, so the environmental factors that we spoke about earlier, these are the major environmental factors that are involved in germination: temperature, moisture, aeration, and not in all cases it's light. All right, for the smaller seeded crops, for example, lettuce and and kale and those things, sometimes they need some trigger of light. So that is why they cannot be planted when we are using them, planting them in the seedling tray. We cannot do it too deep. Remember, there's a thumbs rule for how deep seeds are actually planted. We'll come to that in a while because you're supposed to be familiar with it. Yes, I'm Jonathan. You raise your hand. You can turn on your mic and say what you have to say.
Yeah, with respect to the light, right? I know we have to do a seedling tree, and we have to state the environmental conditions that we growing it in.
Yeah.
So so that means you would have to choose all the seeds that even though they're from different families, they all have to be compatible as they would be with the same environmental conditions, since they would be in the same seedling tray.
What you could all you could do is to alter the things. Remember, with the small seeded crops, you're going to be planting it close to the top. You're not going to be burying them too deep as you will do with the larger seeds. If, for example, if you do something like a pea, a bean, or something, that will be planted much deeper. So in the same seedling tray, all of them could be done, and using the same environmental conditions for all of them. All right, but it's just the depth that is the key thing. That
With
answers
the diameter of the seed related to the
yeah,
diameter.
yeah. That is the
Okay.
thumbs rule, right? So it
All
must be
right.
twice the diameter of the seed for the depth. All right. Okay, so carrying on with germination, the physiological steps, as you'll recall, is the first for the first step, the first major step or stage. You have three phases in the first stage, which is the imbibition. All right, and remember, imbibition is a very rapid process, as you will see here. As soon as the seed imbibes that water, that moisture, it just rapidly swells. All right, and it reaches a phase which is known as the lag phase, where you have a lot of metabolic processes taking place, and that lasts for quite a while. All right, and until you have the emergence of the radicle, and then stage 2 occurs after. All right, where you have the shoot development and the root development continuing. Right. In terms of the early development of the seeds now, you'll recall that you have two major types of seeds, of both types, the dicots and the monocots, and they have different types of germination processes. You have the hypogeal germination that may take place where the cotyledons remain under, and then a hook is formed to the top of the epicotyl, as for hypogeal germination, and the opposite happens for epigeal germination. All right, but the early seedling development is continued. What happens in it's cell division continues. All right, and you have the root radicle forming. All right, emergence of the plumule or the growing point of the shoot. All right, and then seedling weight increases, and then the whole shoot continues to grow, and respiration and water and uptake is increased, development of branch root systems, and the development of the true leaves. All right, this is the true leaf for the epicotyl, for example. Right. Now, if your seed is not germinating, there are a number of factors that may be responsible for seeds not germinating. And remember, for the germination test, I told you there are some limitations. All right, you don't know what is the reason the seed isn't germinating. All right, because whatever you get, sometimes you get normal seeds being germinated, you have abnormal seeds, or sometimes seeds remain dormant. Okay, and there's the next test that I introduced you all to in year 2 called the tetrazolium test. I don't know if you recall that test. It's remember, tetrazolium is based on a compound called formazan. No, formazan is what it actually formed, but the compound, if let me see if I could try to remember the compound for this. It's tetrazolium. Right, what it relies on is it relies on something called dehydrogenase enzymes. So it's a clear solution. The tetrazolium chloride is a clear solution, and when the seeds are immersed into it, what happens is that there's a release of hydrogen ions, and what happens is that the clear solution causes it to, you will see the tissues in this in the seed itself turning red. And that is only if the seed is viable, it turns red. If it does not turn red, that means the seeds are not viable. All right. So that's the tetrazoleum test, and that is also considered a viability test. All right. So you have two viability tests: the germination test and the tetrazoleum test. Right. So let's get back to these factors affecting poor germination. You have weak seeds or low vigor, and that could be caused by a number of reasons. For example, poor storage facilities. All right. Remember, storage is particularly important because from the time the seed leaves the mother plant, what happens? The clock starts to tick for it, and it starts to deteriorate. And unless I put it in the right environmental conditions, which is I have to lower the relative humidity, I have to lower the temperature. All right, I certainly remember, you recall two Tom's rules, the James rules and the Harrington rule. I could probably do some research on it because we did it in here too. And they will dictate how long the seeds could survive. All right. And remember, this just to, if you recall, there are two major types of seeds. They are the orthodox seeds, and you also have the recalcitrant seeds. The orthodox seeds are the seeds which can be stored for a very long period of time, anywhere between 3 to sometimes 15 years. It can be more in some instances. All right. So, for example, in some seed banks, they have seeds there for decades. They're decades old. All right. But because they have them in the right environmental conditions, they could last there for a very long period of time. All right. And you'll notice that most of the orthodox seeds are usually much smaller. All right. So things like a tomato, your sweet pepper, all those things can last anywhere between 3 to 5 to 10 years. All right. But once you don't put them in the right environmental condition, they start to deteriorate. And deterioration is as a result of a number of things happening, a lot of metabolic processes taking place. All right. You have respiration and biosynthesis is reduced. You have the degradation of the membrane taking place. All right. Then the plant will start to develop, it will become less resistant to any pests and diseases. All right. And then you have impairment of energy and synthesis mechanisms. All right. So that usually happens when your seed starts to deteriorate and you don't have it in the right environmental conditions when they are not stored properly. All right. And of course, the vigor of the seeds will be much lower. Okay. All right. So continuing here, unfavorable conditions, pathogens, insects, birds, and animals affecting it, and then the hard seed coats. All right, those are the major reasons for seeds not germinating. But what are some of the characteristics of a good seed? So seeds must be true to type. They must belong to the proper variety or strain of the crop, which is being proposed to grow. All right, seeds must also be healthy and free from inert materials, weeds, weed seeds that is, and crop seeds. Seeds must be uniform in size, shape, and color. And they must also be viable with a high germination percentage. All right, and remember the germination percentage and how it is actually done in batches of 100. And you need at least 5 batches of 100 for the seeds. And you're going to be placing them in a germinating chamber, or most typical places on top of fridge where you have nice warm environment. All right, and whatever emerges there, you work it as a percentage. And then that will give you the germination percentage. And remember that label. Remember, the label is there's a concept called the truth in labeling concept. All right, that means that what is inside that packet is a legal, that packet is a legal document. All right, so if you ain't get what's inside that packet, you could sue the company. All right, of course, people don't sue anybody here in Trinidad because you could get away with everything here, murder here in this country. But the thing about it is that there's this concept of truth in labeling, and whatever is noted on that seed package, that is what exactly you must get in the seed, right? And remember, if you could recall what should be on a package, you have a number of, I don't think I have it in these slides here, but it must have information on the germination percentage. It must also um, the amount of inert material. So you have pure seed, inert seed, other crop seed, weed seeds. Sometimes they even have noxious seeds. You have to have the percentage worked out there. All right, the germination percentage is also important. The weight, the date it was packaged, the lot number is important, and of course the variety and the kind. All right, the address of the dealer, wherever it comes from, that is also important. All right. I'm supposed to do a lab with you all tomorrow, but I have a class with the next one. So what I will do, I will try to upload a video, but it might not be between the hours that we have tomorrow from 10 to 12. I think you are supposed to have a next class tomorrow, and it was supposed to be a practical. All right, so I will try to upload a video, but it might be a little later than that because I have to go to the field station to do the footage for you all. Right? So what I was saying, seeds must be uniform in size, shape, and color. All right, and again, this all comes under that whole seed conditioning thing that we discussed in year 2 when we looked under seed technology. You remember when seeds are being processed, they have to be separated. The whole processing procedure is where the seeds are conditioned and they have equipment to do that separation of seed size and all those things and colors, all right, so that you won't have contaminants in the seed lots. All right, so they must be viable and they must have a high percentage, germination percentage, of course, free from pests, disease-causing organisms, and the seed packet must have a label. We also did storage in year 2, all right, and we looked at the different types of storage that we could have. Remember how when you packaging material, that is, you all remember the fact that packaging material, we have different types. You have aluminum foil packages, we have things like gunny bags, we have sealed containers, and that's aluminum containers. All right, we have sealed polyethylene plastic bags as well as woven plastic bags could be also used. What are some of the things that you should try to avoid when you're packing seeds or storing seeds? Is to avoid things like the brown paper bag, because brown paper bags, what they do, they absorb a lot of moisture. So you want to avoid things like paper boxes and even plastic bags sometimes. All right, and you know, ever so often when we go to the agricultural shop and we buy seeds, the loose seeds that is, they usually put it, long time I know they used to put it a lot in a brown paper bag. But I don't think they usually do that again. They put it in a little clear sealed packet for you. All right, that in itself too is not ideal, but it's much better. And of course, when you bring it home and you keep it in a crisper in your refrigerator, that should be relatively good, and that's mainly for the vegetable seeds. Right, yeah, so I was telling you something in the slide before about the differences in the seeds and the seed sizes, right? And I told you that the orthodox seeds are the smaller seeds that could store for a longer period of time, but the recalcitrant seeds now, those are the larger seeds. All right, not necessarily things like beans and corn. Yes, they are larger, but they are not considered recalcitrant. Those seeds could store, beans and corn could store for a long period of time, right? You just have to be careful that no moisture affects it at all, because you're going to have some premature germination taking place, right? But the recalcitrant seeds are things like mango. All right, remember those large seeded crops, they cannot store for very long. That is why they are called recalcitrant. Recalcitrant, the next word for it is stubborn, right? They cannot be stored for a long period of time. So avocado for is the next example. Even tamarind and long period of time, right? So small seeds, getting back to seeding in the garden now. So Jonathan asked a question a while ago about planting multiple types of crops in seedling trays. All right. Now this, I would not suggest planting things like beans in a seedling tray. All right. Yeah. Ryan, your hand is up. You have a question to ask?
Yeah, it's Rain, and
Oh,
I was
sorry. I'm
asking.
sorry.
Yeah, I was asking a question before was that
Uh-huh.
if we have substantial seed banks, especially for recalcitrant seeds or species that are endangered, as well as like
Uh-huh.
other plant material from endangered species?
All right. Now, usually what we have in terms of seed banks, well, we don't have much in terms of seed banks. We're now trying to do one at the university field station here in UWI. All right, we're just getting some, it is taking a little time, but the Ministry of Agriculture in Trinidad here, they have a seed bank, and they have about 10 or more major vegetable crops that they have in their seed bank. If you recall, over the lockdown period, they were giving out about 50,000 packages, right? Now, that is for small seeded crops. For large seeded crops now, it's difficult to store them in seed banks. So what is done is you have germplasms, you have gene banks, all right, where you actually plant them out. So like for example, cocoa seeds cannot store because they are recalcitrant. So that is why we have the cocoa gene bank. All right, so you follow that, Rian? Is Rian right? I'm pronouncing it correctly?
It's
Rain.
yeah, it's
Rain.
rain.
Rain. All right, it's an unusual
Yeah.
name, but it's nice.
And
Yeah.
one more question, right?
Uh-huh.
Do you all have like for propagation storage? What storage techniques are available at UE
All
for
right, so
seeds and explants and
the
stuff?
seeds. All right, so what we're also doing right now, we are trying to refurbish our seed. We have a seed facility at the University Field Station. When you all did practical skills, it was not functional at all. We had to shut it down because we had serious problems with the rats, right? So we had to totally shut it down to the public. Right now, we're trying to refurbish it. We're now doing the ceiling and all those things. And what we have inside there is a chiller, right? And in the chiller is where we usually store all the seeds, and we have to package the seeds nicely in bottles, right? We have them in containers as well, and they stay there at a temperature, a particular temperature. We keep it at, and we have to monitor that temperature ever so often. All right. What happened is that the system broke down. Rats got into the bank that we had there and started to feed on the seeds, and we weren't paying attention to it. And if you don't have proper management on a farm, then those things start to break down and deteriorate very, very quickly. All right, what we're trying to do now is to have an external seed bank. So in addition to the chiller we have in the seed facility, we want to have that as well. All right. And going back to what we want to do and achieve with our seed facility, we want to be able to test seeds, right? And we want to be able to commercialize our corn variety. All right. Now, I'm not too sure if you all tasted this, the UW7, but we have a lot of kudos for the taste of it because people like it's not a very sweet corn compared to a lot of the imported corn varieties. The sweet, I know a lot of people like the taste of the Canadian sweet corn. All right. But what we have to think in terms of is that when we really cannot get these imported seeds, we have to look after our best interests here in Trinidad. All right, so we have to get into seed production. We don't have the land space, but we have farmers in the central areas, for example, who are willing to grow out crops for us and to have them available for commercial purposes. All right. So that is one of the things that we want to start doing at the University Field Station. So that is why I told you we want to purify that line because we had some crossing with it within the past few years with the farm corn. We want to try to see if we could purify it and make sure that we have all the characteristics of that true sweetness. All right, it's not a very, very sweet corn. You know, sometimes when you consume sweet corn, you can get a little nauseous. I have eaten the super sweet because we did some tests for China where we looked at 12 different varieties of sweet corn. And when we were actually doing the organoleptic part of it, where people were actually coming in to taste, we had people who were feeling nauseous from the very super sweet corn varieties, even the wax varieties. All right. And our variety stood out as one of the best tasting ones, right? So that is a variety that we really want to get commercialized. And of course, with that, we'll take things like patenting and all those things because it was actually developed by, at the time in the 1990s, early 1990s, by Professor Richard Braffett. All right. And it was between him and a gentleman at the farm at the time. He was our chief tech by the name of Mr. Harry, Saran Harry Ram. All right. And they developed that line. All right. Right, so getting back to, anybody have any other questions? No questions? All right, so large seeds like are planted deeper and further apart, large seeds. Usually we want to plant large seeds directly into the field, right? Whereas opposed to the smaller seeded crops, we want to make sure that we put them in the nursery before, all right? Although there are instances in North America, for example, remember these, to do that is a whole operation by itself, to do seeds in nurseries. That is a whole operation by itself, and it is very, very expensive. All right, so that is why people like Shanti, for example, I can't remember, she's from Siparia side, right? She does her nurseries, but she has a piece of machinery that she got as a prize several years ago for Farm of the Year, and that cut down a lot in the labor aspect. All right, in terms of transplant seeding, sowing the seeds, right? Those operations are very, very critical because the smaller the seeds, for example, if I want to plant celery, it's very onerous for me to have to take individual seeds and plant them in each one of the cells of 128 to 200 tray. All right, so it's placed in a tray, right? An open trough, a kind of trough, and then when they germinate, we have to painstakingly take them out. All right, so in some countries, what they do a number of different practices, which, for example, they do priming of seeds. So all these we spoke about in here too, very, very quickly. We looked at seed enhancements, all right? And that is all about improving the plantability of the seeds, all right? And it is done by putting film coating, seed priming, right? What they do for rice in some countries, they actually initiate germination in the rice and then they stop it, all right, so that when it is time to broadcast, they do it aerially, and in no time at all the seeds will germinate and it will be uniform, all right. So other things like lettuce, for example, and some other broccoli. Remember, broccoli is very small, but there are ways that you could plant it directly, and that is by pelletizing them or by doing the film coating, right? So all those practices, and sometimes in the gels that they use to impregnate over the seeds, they put certain hormones as well to stimulate germination, so that you will have uniformity in the field. And they use planters, the hoppers, seed hoppers in the field to directly not transplant, but to plant them directly into the soil. All right. So we do it differently here. We set up our nurseries and everything, and that is a whole big industry. It's a multi-million-dollar industry here in Trinidad, because you would have seen, especially over the lockdown, a lot of dealers and people with agri shops were making so much money. And you see how they jacked up the price of a lot of the seedlings. All right, some seedlings went from 50 cents to about $2-3 for one. All right, I remember paying for a tomato plant. I paid $5 for a tomato plant. By the time I reached home, 2 days after it died. All right, because I don't really take care of my nursery. Is very, very good, but I don't have a green thumb like some people. Yeah, Rain, you have your hand up again.
Yes. Do you have equipment to do hydrogel, like the chemicals, etc. at you?
No, we don't. We don't have it here. We don't have it here. That is something we will want to do eventually. All right, because the next thing that we want to do too is, besides doing the corn commercially, we want to be able to do other seeds as well. All right, so we are trying to restructure our whole crop museum. In crop museum, we will have mainly open pollinated varieties on display, from which we will save seeds. Like over the lockdown, Natalia will be able to attest to this, because we had her class last year, the vegetable production class. They tried to redo the crop museum first. Unfortunately, over the lockdown, everything just went into disarray and it's in a mess again. All right, but from that class, I want to commend that class, because they did quite a lot of work with their beans. They had a number of the different crops running, so that over the lockdown, I was able to produce something called a seed kit. Well, you're not a seed kitters, but I had 16 different varieties of the plants that they produced there, and I was able to distribute it to some challenged people in society. All right, not many. I didn't have as much as the Ministry of Agriculture. They had 50,000, but I was just able to give about 250 seed kits. And I'll show you a picture of the seed kit that we did for the lab tomorrow. All right. We had 16 different varieties. Actually, we had to buy some seeds. We ended up buying some We got some seeds from Mr. Michael because we did this collaboratively with Jeff, UN, Dr. Shada from, I can't remember her surname, from UN Jeff, and she had purchased some seeds from Mr. Michael from Mafas, and we kind of got together and we did these packages to distribute to people. All right, so that is one of the intentions, to have these. We want to actually, before the lockdown, we want to actually launch a seed pack from UE and call it a disaster preparedness kit, seeds of survival. I'm sure you would have come across that in North America because they sell it very often on Amazon, seeds of survival. Or the and doomsday seed vaults. They call them all sorts of different names. All right, but it's important. It's an important package that you could have available in the event that you have a natural disaster. You just go very quickly and you plant your little garden in whichever area. All right. So the target we had at first was for households. All right, but there were quite a number of people who had similar ideas and they were doing it during the lockdown. Mm-hmm. Right. So let's. Have a next question. Somebody with a next question. Oh. All right. So avoid planting extremes, planting so deep that seedlings can't reach the surface. All right. Of course, that is for your small seeded crops. Remember, Jonathan just reminded us of the Tom's rule. That based on the diameter, it must be twice the size of the diameter, the length of the diameter. All right, for actually planting the seeds. So lettuce is not supposed to be very deep, broccoli not very deep, all right? So planting so shallow. So these are the two extremes, planting so deep that seedlings can't reach the surface and planting so shallow that seeds can be washed away by rain. Right, these are some things I wanted to mention on seed storage. All right, they have varied lifespans. So we spoke about the varied lifespans. We spoke about the recalcitrant as opposed to the orthodox seeds a while ago. So the vegetable seeds, they can store for between 3 to 15 years. Now in that seed bank in Norway, they have seeds. I don't know if you all ever heard of it. I think it's Felbad, they call it. Probably pronouncing it incorrectly, but it's there. There's a seed, that is the largest seed bank. If you are putting things in the chat and not seeing it, so you have to put up your hand and tell me, because the way I'm sharing the screen here, it's difficult for me to check the chat. Right. They have seeds from about 165 different countries. I just learned a couple of weeks ago that they don't have any seeds from Trinidad. All right, and the whole objective of that seed bank is that in the event of a natural disaster in any country, that country could come back to them and get the seeds. All right. With that lockdown that just happened over the past 6 months there, think about the difficulty of getting seeds out of there. How else they will bring it here when everything is shut down? All our airports and everything, seaports, everything was shut down. All right, so that is why it's important for countries to develop their own seed banks. All right, now seed banks are not only the responsibility of governments and universities, they're also the responsibility of communities. All right, and there's a whole book I have, and I could share with you the link to it, Community Seed Banks. All right, this is where you work with farmers and saving their land races. All right, that same farmer I told you we just happened to bounce up, Jonathan might be familiar with his name. I'm trying to remember, Mr. Tillock, Jason Tillock. We bounced him up. I know he was working with Mafas at some point in time. That's what Riyadh was telling me. Yeah, he claimed that he has a seed bank, all right? And he had several seeds in the seed bank. And the first time we visited him about 3 years ago, he was able to show us all the farmers he was working with and the farmers who were producing seeds, and he was keeping it in his seed bank. And he was also doing nurseries to sell back to them. We were never really able to see a seed bank. He kept telling us about the seed bank he has and all this promising to take us back to there. But last year we tried again to visit his seed bank and we really didn't. I don't know if any of you all ever heard about him. All right, he's a self-taught breeder, right? He's very knowledgeable on crop breeding aspects, and he has developed his own line of things he claimed, right? And when we visited him last year, he was able to share some seeds of melangen with us, some landrace melangen. All right, the ministry also has that landrace as well. He has a tomato variety, which he told us is a landrace, and of course the name will vary. He had also some pepper varieties, some bird pepper type varieties, and there was one, a chili type, which he also claimed was a landrace. All right, so it's important for mirrors of these seeds to be stored throughout. So we at the university should have all these varieties, and we should also partner with all different farmers groups also to have them do their own storage of seeds. And there are different ways that you could store. It doesn't necessarily have to be a chiller, right? We visited a place in Florida last year, a seed facility in Echo in Florida, and that is a wonderful place. If we didn't have this lockdown, it would have been a wonderful place for a lot of you all to go to do your internship. In fact, I think when you finish your degree, you should just connect with them and ask them if you could spend a month or so in their institution, because it's quite an experience. All right, what they do at ECHO, can't remember what ECHO stands for, but they usually train people to go and work in third world countries. It's a kind of religious Christian organization, but they actually train people to go as agricultural missionaries in places like Africa and South America and various places. But they show people how they have demonstrations on how seeds can be stored differently. So they have the typical scientifically operated seed bank facility, so they can show you that. But there's one way you could use with sandbags. All right, you build a whole covered area with sandbags. Sandbags work quite nicely. When we went inside it was a very cool environment. All right, and the seeds could have been about below 20. It was far below 20 degrees Celsius inside there, and they had seeds actually stored in there. And they were telling us in a lot of African countries, that is how they actually store their seeds in certain communities. All right, so farmers don't necessarily have to go the expensive way of buying freezers and all those chillers and all those things, but there are other things that they could do to do the seed storage. All right, so getting back to my slides here, the best storage conditions outside the seed, cool and dry, anywhere between 1 to 10 degrees Celsius, 50 to 70 degrees Fahrenheit, relative humidity. And inside the seed, the moisture must be 10 to 14% moisture content. All right. Sometimes it's even lower for some seeds. It could be for some smaller seeded crops between 7 to 8% moisture content. All right. And then it's best for 5 to 10%. Right. Moisture content within the seed is relative to relative humidity outside the seed. Right. So this one is on transplants. When might you want to use transplants instead of seeds? Well, we discussed that already, when the seeds are very small and when you want to ensure uniformity when you're transplanting. All right, because mind you, although I mentioned to you that you don't necessarily have to plant larger seeded crops in a nursery, there are farmers I have seen throughout Trinidad who prefer to plant things like the pumpkins in a nursery before and transplant them because they want to see uniformity in that field. All right, because ever so often you plant your things on the field and you see this hole missing here and that hole missing, you have to come and replace and put new things and supply from time to time. All right, so that is why they prefer to do their nurseries before. But the difficulty with doing that sometimes is that you can damage the young seedling. All right, the susceptibility of the seedling to any damage it is more for larger seeded crops than it is for smaller seeded crops. All right, so it's when it's difficult to start vegetables, some seeds for the smaller seeds in particular, to avoid unfavorable weather conditions and also to extend the growing season. That is why we transplant. All right, for earlier harvests. All right, for reduced seedling decay and to eliminate weaker plants. All right, and sometimes definitely when the seed is very expensive. So things like zucchini, you wouldn't want to plant. Zucchini is very expensive. The seeds are very expensive and very hard to get. All right, and mind you, there are some open pollinated varieties of zucchini, or not all the ones that we import here into Trinidad in terms of seeds are hybrid varieties so that we could save seeds from them. All right, I have tried to save seeds from them. I mean, the germination percentage are a little low, but that's because probably I didn't store them properly. All right, but these very hard to get seeds and very expensive will definitely definitely want to do a nursery for. All right, I have purchased seeds where like it's almost $2-3 for one seed from Caribbean Chemicals, and sometimes the germination percentage poor, but the seeds are very expensive, right? Because of the particular traits that that will promise and the resistance to certain pests and diseases. So that is why a lot of seeds are very expensive. So when you know they are expensive like that, you definitely have to set a nursery. All right, and the receptacles for doing nursery production, you all will be familiar with it. All right, the same that I told you about the Caribbean Chemicals, they carry, I see they folded it nicely into the little box that they're selling it in, so that it will fit in there. All right. Well, you have the Styrotex, and the Styrotex could be used multiple times. And of course, when you use and reusing these things, you need to sterilize them. And usually, the sterilization is done in about a 10% solution of Clorox. All right. But these harder trays are much better to get sometimes, and they're easier to clean. All right. The Styrotex, they both have their years that they could last. Right? But I have seen Styrotex, that's the common one that a lot of Asasco people will use, right? Although they deteriorate about after 3 to 5 years, all right? These wooden slugs here, they use them as well, these trays, all right? So in these, for example, this is where you will plant your very small seeded crops, things like your celery. You'll be planting it here, and then when they germinate, then you'll transplant them to something like your seedling tree, right? Right, so you have, besides that, you have things like the coconut core that is used to do nurseries as well. All right, I'm saying all that to talk about the nursery and how it should actually, but this is a nursery in a developing country in Africa. All right, but ideally, now if you go back to this slide here, you see how these people have their nursery. What you all think about that? A lot of our nurseries in Trinidad, they have them very close to the ground. They actually have them on blocks, bricks, about one height high sometimes, and they have them resting there on pieces of wood, very close to the ground. What are some of the disadvantages of having a nursery so low to the ground? Anybody?
Increase exposure to pathogens.
Right, okay, especially because of what?
Well, the proximity to the ground, I don't know if soil splash would be, no soil splash,
right,
but
splash.
the splashing
Yes,
of the
definitely
water.
splash. Yeah, the splashing of the water. So a splash usually will cause, yeah, right, rain. Miss Cooper, you were saying something?
The ease of work, because it's so close to the ground, you have to bend down and get it, versus
Right,
having to higher, you could just like lift it up easier.
right. Yes, that's the next disadvantage. Okay, anybody else? Right, well, thanks for those two, because basically having them so low, yeah, you're gonna have splash, that is very important. And of course, you want to avoid any pest and disease very early in the development of the plant. But sometimes you may have weeds very close to the area, all right? And that may cause problems as well. When you have the splashy weed, seeds could come into these trees, right? And they could also be transported to the field when you take them across. And I've seen that happen. We have bought seedlings from Asasco, and we brought weeds from Asasco. All right, because Asasco is known for that. I hope nobody here working with Asasco, so that they will sooner. Right? But these are two major disadvantages. And the next disadvantage you could see in a system like this too is the aeration. Remember, aeration is very important, especially for avoiding things like pest and for disease spread in particular. All right, so that ideally you will want a system where you have stands built at about waist height, at least up to your waist. All right, for ease of handling, so you wouldn't have to bend down, as Ms. Cooper was saying. All right, and of course, on the top of the stands, you must have a material which will enable some good airflow. All right, I've seen people use BRC, people they use just wood slots, all right? Because you want to make sure too that when you irrigate, right, or fertigate or whatever you use to for the watering, that it will be able to just go straight to the floor, all right, after it passes through the plant. All right, you don't want it to accumulate on this area here because too much moisture, that is a recipe for disaster with disease spread. All right, and remember, one of the most typical problems that you will have in nurseries is what? Anybody? The most typical problem that you will have in nurseries
Dampen off.
in terms of a disease, damping off. And remember what damping off is, right? It's a complex of different, it's when the young seedling starts to wilt as a result of a complex of different plant diseases. So it's not just Phytophthora alone, it's Rhizoctonia, it's Pythium, it's about 4 or 5 of them different ones. You can't actually pinpoint which one in particular. And of course, moisture, too high of a moisture content could contribute to that. Right. And of course, when you're setting up your nursery, you want to set up your nursery in a covered area, that has reduced light. All right. So Sarah netting is usually used, but you don't want to use something with the percentage too high. A 60% percentage for your shade cloth should be okay, right? Because remember, eventually you will have to move it from that environment when you're hardening the plant, all right? But ideally, you'll want to have a covered area. So that besides the Sarah netting, over the Sarah netting, sometimes you may want to put the greenhouse type plastic, all right? As they have it here in this house here, all right? I think they probably have insect screen. This looks like an insect screen, and to the top they have the Sarah netting and everything. Right, because you need to have that reduced light. You can't expose the plant to too much high light because so what are some of the places that you will be putting your seedlings? If for those of you all who started already, where you placed your seedlings so far? Anybody? Your seeds. You all started it at all?
Yeah, miss. I have mine in the shed outside.
Under a shed, all right.
So
but you have
the light is on like the best, like, because it's a galvanized roof. So I put it.
All right.
So I was wondering if to put it on like I have like a plastic table, like I could put it out so that like not under the shed. I don't know what to do with it.
All right, well, yeah, I might be a little cautious with the shed because remember that light availability and not too sure what, because all of them might start to point in one direction.
Yeah.
Eventually, yeah. And they will become very etiolated or leggy.
Yeah.
So you want to avoid that, right? Especially for your larger seeded crops, right?
Yeah.
Okay. All right, but whatever it is, it must stay in that covered environment for about 4 to 6 weeks. Right? And again, dependent on the variety, because something like if you put beans inside there, you don't want to leave the beans there so long because, of course, they will get very leggy, right? But you want to, things like tomato and sweet pepper, they should not last in the greenhouse more than 6 weeks. But anything else, you will start to have problems, all right? So you want to use clean containers, trays of plastic and polyethylene with proper drainage, right? And if previously used, yes, well, but I spoke about that when you're recycling or reusing the trays. All right, you want to give them a good sterilization before. All right, you use a coarse sterile potting mix. All right, ideally we use the Pro Mix. All right, and you'll recall the components of the Pro Mix. You all can recall the anybody? The constituents of Pro Mix. Anybody? It's mainly peat moss. And what else? What else you could recall you have in
It has in perlite.
Yes, it has perlite, right? And what else? It has, sometimes you'll see a little shiny compound. It depends on what brand. A shiny compound, vermiculite.
Vermilite?
Vermiculite.
Okay.
Yeah, vermiculite they call it. So all those are referred to as wetting agents, all right? So they actually swell when you add moisture to it. It swells and it retains that moisture for a little period of time, all right? And then you have a pH adjuster as well, all right? Sometimes it comes in those little white balls, which is quite similar to the perlite, but it's a little bit different, all right? And that's just mainly for it's calcium carbonate there, just to have that pH being adjusted from time to time, all right? Because sometimes, when you leave it too long, you're going to have problems in the industry. Sometimes you'll have algae, a film of algae on the top here. And that is usually when you put too much moisture. You add too much moisture, you will have those problems. All right, but the peat moss, again, during the lockdown, that was a very difficult thing. And we are so highly dependent on our nursery production here in the Caribbean. We're so highly dependent on these imported inputs, right? Which is unfortunate. So we have people like Dr. Eudoxie, who has been doing a lot of work over the years, looking for alternatives. All right, he has done work with students with it. They use grass clippings and banana leaves to make compost. All right, and these composts he was using at different percentages to try to see if they could cut down the amount of premix that was used. All right. But I know he's doing some further work on it right now, and he hopes to start a larger project where they actually produce compost for the nursery industry. All right. Remember also that this pro-mix material, this potting mix, must also be sterile, right? Free of any pests and diseases. Must be free of any pests and diseases and weed seeds as well. All right, but the major thing is that you don't want it to dry out, because that could affect the growth and development of the plant. So you have to keep the area a little moist, but not too moist from time to time. The next thing that we need to note too with Promix is that it has no nutrients at all. All right, so you have to keep adding nutrients. And the nutrients must be added anywhere between 4 to 7 days. Very often you have to be adding the nutrients to it. All right, otherwise you're going to have a situation where you have plants that yellowing taking place. The plant's going to be very highly susceptible to any pest and disease that may pass around, right? Of course, nutrient deficiencies, well, I just mentioned that before. All right, plant may be stunted or it may grow too long. All right, so these are some of the problems that you may have if you don't have the proper fertilizer regime for the plants. All right, and what is an ideal fertilizer? Well, I think I get that in the next slide. But before planting, hardening plants by reducing water and gradually exposing them to the sun and the wind. Those are some important activities of acclimatization that you need to do before you set them out. All right, so some of the tips for transplanting: set out the healthiest plants and avoid disturbing the roots when transplanting. All right, you cut the soil with a knife if the seedlings are in a box, and then you place them in the soil, the entire thing, that you must be placed in the soil with all the roots intact. All right. Sometimes it's difficult to take it out of the seedling tray. There's some, you could take a little pencil or some little device and you push it through the hole to the bottom and try to get the entire plant structure removed before. All right, and don't try not to break up the roots, because once you have that disturbance of the roots, you're going to have the plant being very heavily compromised when it reaches out, and it wouldn't be very competitive. And of course, the other things might affect it in the open field. All right, so you moisten the soil and you remove it from the container if they are individual plants. And when planting in the soil, do not pack the soil too tightly around it. And you also have to bury the cut leaves. And that's if it is beans, for example, mainly beans. And to avoid leaving it in a tray too long, all right, you want to avoid doing that, because you're going to have leggy or etiolated plants. All right, it could still be planted. All right, but again, that uniformity may be a little issue in the field, and the plants may be a little, because you see that introduces the whole element of stress. And when plants are stressed, you're going to have that hormonal imbalance. All right, and when you have that hormonal imbalance, you're going to have things happening to the plant. The plant's going to be very susceptible to pest and disease attack. All right, so you water in the seedlings following transplanting. All right, sometimes a starter solution is used. All right. And the most typical starter solution is the Nutrex. A lot of people like to use the Nutrex, or they might use the Miracle Grow or one of those things. All right. But the important thing in terms of nursery management and the fertilizers that you use, you're going to use something like Nutrex in the nursery. I have seen people use 12, 12, 17 plus 2. I do not know why. All right. Because that is something that you use for things like corn and the plants, older plants. Remember, that 17 indicates that you're going to be for production, all right, for fruiting, all right. So you want to avoid something like that, but you also in considering what to use, you're going to use something that has high nitrogen very early, but you want to make sure that you have good root development, all right. So phosphorus is particularly important throughout that 6-week period. So you have to do something to encourage good root establishment, good root development. All right, because remember, you want, and again, you want to have nice, white, healthy roots, because that is indicative of a healthy plant. And remember, the root tip is what is considered like the brain of the plant, right? And that is where you have the stimulus of the activity of hormones taking place for good growth and development of the plant. All right, so you want to ensure that that is up to par and that you have that well taken care of. What was the point I was going to make? Something. Right, yeah, but yeah, so this is the slide I was coming to. In terms of the characteristics of a good seedling, you need to have that shoot to root ratio of 2 to 1, right? You need white, healthy roots, because what brown roots indicate is that you have the plants being diseased. They probably stay in this in seedling tray too long. All right, now if the seedlings stay in the seedling tray too long, what you have is balling of the roots, balling, where the roots will start to, like, they are forcing themselves to the bottom of the receptacle, the cell. They're going to start forming a ball there, and then they will start getting a little brownish in color. All right, because now they are competing for nutrients against itself, right, and for space. All right, so you want to avoid that. So that is why beyond 6 weeks is not acceptable. I mean, it's dependent on what type of plant too. So for some, it's only 4 weeks you're leaving it in the seedling tray. So things like lettuce, you're not going to leave it for very long. You're going to leave it for about 4 weeks, right? You need the leaves to be shiny, especially for things like sweet pepper, right? The leaves must also, the plants must also be free of diseases and pests. All right, a typical pest that affects a lot of the nurseries, and I'm sure you'll come across it when you purchase seedlings sometimes, is the leaf miners. You see these little white lines running through the leaves. All right, sometimes that is where you need to make sure that you purchase seedlings that have good quality. So you have to examine your seedlings before. And whenever you go to purchase seedlings, make sure you select your own seedlings. People like to go and select your seedlings for you. Make sure you select your own seedlings, all right, and examine them carefully. All right, they should have no more than 4 to 6 leaves, depending on the variety. Remember, every week a leaf comes out, a leaflet. All right, so that is why it should only have about 6 leaves during that 6-week period. All right, and of course, the plant must not be etiolated, and it should not be flowering, because again, if it starts to flower, and I have seen, and I have done this for myself too, leave my sweet peppers in the tray too long and they start to flower, and from the time you go to plant that, transplant that, that is a stress. That is stress on the plant, and you're going to have a lot of problems in terms of susceptibility to pests and diseases. So you want to avoid that from happening. So you should not be flowering in the nursery. All right, you want to make sure that that doesn't happen. Right. In terms of seed management and of environmental conditions during germination, development, and seedling maturation, all right, use propagation structures, infrastructure to optimize environmental conditions during germination, so that the temperatures must be key, the air circulation and the moisture delivery. All right, so we spoke about some of those things when I showed you the pictures of how a nursery should actually look, right? Dr. Daly will show you some more pictures on propagation facilities and how they are designed a little later on. And he has some very nice pictures to show you of different types of facilities that could be used. Continued management of environmental conditions for seedling development in terms of the temperature management must be critical, the maintenance of good air circulation, all right, moisture, and of course light availability for photosynthesis. Again, well, I asked this question earlier, but it's not actually a different scenario. All right, would you recommend this layout for a nursery? Just yes or no? Anybody?
No.
No? All right.
I will
And for
use
the
it
very same, you will use it?
when I first starting out, because if you first starting out, I'm just being practical, yes? If I
Uh-huh.
first starting out, I would use it at first, but then I would go the other route of enhancing it basically, because
Mm-hmm.
you don't know a person's situation. Sometimes you don't always have the money to start out how you would like to start out. So for me, I'm just
Yeah.
saying this is how I would start out, but then you would add on to it basically and make it better.
Okay. Well, I sort of agree with you to some extent because I see where you're coming from. All right, you don't have all the finances to start using those stands, for example, because that is a cost. That is a high cost to actually build those stands, right? So you start off with right. Natalia, want to say something? Natalia?
EMS,
Uh-huh.
morning. You hear me?
Morning.
I disagree to a point too, because I see a friend of mine, he just cut bamboo,
Uh-huh.
use that at the stand, and use PRC wire to put his cups in it as a stand.
Okay.
So he cut in cost by using that.
He cut in costs. All right. But how low he has it? He has it low like this, or he has it a little higher?
No, he have it on a height to use the bamboo as like
Or he use the
the
bamboo?
legs, and he use
All
the
right.
BRC wire to put the cups in it.
Okay. All right. So he has okay, and that works well for him. All right. And he could, as the young lady was saying before, you work with what you have. All right. Instead of putting on that large initial amount of money, right? And then you could as you build yourself, then you invest differently and do something a little more let me say scientific or proper. All right, somebody else was saying something. All right, thought I heard a mic on. All right, but this more or less goes on to the same point with the environmental conditions inside the ministry. All right, all this again in terms of the propagation facilities and what it must have and what it mustn't have and the disadvantages. All right. Right. So I don't want to repeat myself, so I wouldn't go through most of these things again, right? But the general things that I have seen a lot of farmers here in Trinidad, I don't know if you all ever pass on the highway opposite, not too far from Namdefco. I saw a farmer, he put up a relatively nice structure there. But what I understand is that the seedling quality is very poor. I've not gone in to investigate for myself, all right, but I've heard from farmers that the seedling quality is poor, all right. But again, he invested so much in the elaborate structure, all right, and it goes right back to the point the young lady was making. He invested so much in that elaborate structure, but the thing about it is that its quality is very poor. And then there's Netanyanda, I don't know if I'm pronouncing it correctly, in Maloney area, all right. Their structure it's okay as well, but their height is not very high, all right. And people complain sometimes about the quality, but from what I've seen on the highway, it's looking good to me, all right. But I have never really gone inside there, but in terms of airflow and everything, it looks like it's relatively acceptable. All right. I've seen some of Asasco's operation. I mean, a lot of them, they don't really like people to come into the operation to take pictures and all those things. But I've had the opportunity to take classes there in the earlies, and we have seen students saw for themselves or some of the pros and the cons of the industry and everything. But the bottom line is an industry that is very lucrative. All right. You can make quite a lot of money in the industry. All right. But the general structures, a basic structure of using aluminum posts, and you put a basic covering, and your sarah netting draped at the sides, that could offer a good option as well. Keep it as low cost as you could. All right, even if you could build a structure like the gentleman built, we have had an instance where we in one school we built a bamboo greenhouse structure for them to see how it could withstand to the winds. All right, and it lasted at least a year and a half before a heavy wind blew it down. All right, and that is some initial thing that you could probably start off with, and then afterwards, as the money begins to generate, you get into something more substantial. All right. So, well, the open house. You see, I don't want to get into all this because Dr. Daly has some nice pictures in his presentation, either next week or week after, and he will get into all the nitty-gritties of how the houses should look. All right, the different options you have in terms of greenhouses. All right, but I wouldn't recommend doing a hoop house or one of these structures for a nursery. All right, a basic structure is the best thing because remember, it's not staying in that environment for too long. It's staying for at least 6 weeks. All right, and then you remove it gradually to acclimatize to be able to face the field conditions, the open field conditions. All right, so I wouldn't get into heavy investment as yet. All right, eventually, most likely. All right, so let's talk a bit about the role of propagating media. It's mainly to create an idealized structure or texture to supply nutrients to some extent, to provide drainage, to retain moisture, to facilitate aeration, and to discourage pathogens. All right, and based on what I mentioned to you before on ProMix as the ideal type of media that you could use. It has all these basic characteristics, all right? It has good drainage in it, all right? And that's particularly so because of the perlite, all right? It has good moisture retention, and that's because of the not only the perlite, but also the vermiculite. And remember, I told you the vermiculite sort of swells, all right? It does not supply nutrients, but you have to, it is very receptive to the nutrients that you put because you have, it can retain, because of that vermiculite, it can retain moisture and nutrients a little bit, right? And of course, it facilitates aeration, and because it's sterile, it will obviously discourage any pathogens. And of course, it's a good texture. All right. So that there is a philosophical basis for propagation material, and that is it being sustainable, renewable ingredients to reduce energy use. All right. But based on what I told you about the ProMix, that is definitely not a sustainable practice. All right, because the peat bogs are being depleted at a rate that is just phenomenal. All right, and it's causing a lot of environmental upsets. And we are getting most of our ProMix we are getting from Canada, from the peat bogs in Canada. All right, so it is definitely not a sustainable practice. Right, so as I told you before, as Dr. Eudoxie is doing a lot of work on it, we have to look for alternative types. I don't know if you all know of any. All right, now we have the coconut core. Again, the coconut, we produce coconut here. We have coconut. I don't know if you all saw some weeks ago in the newspaper, a farmer was complaining about vendors dumping coconut shells in his land, and that was impeding his access to his fields. I don't know if you all saw that article in the newspapers. Could always share that with you. All right, now this was an excellent opportunity I found for us as a university to get into a little entrepreneurial shop something, because just recently I had a student who purchased for her project, who purchased a banana shredder machine, not banana, sorry, a coconut shredder machine. All right, and she had actually shredded a number of almost fresh coconut, and she had to leave it to compost a little bit, and she was using it to grow she wanted to grow hydroponic sweet potato as her project, right? And the material looked very, very good. It looked almost commercial, and when it started to decompose. All right, I'm seeing two questions. You all could ask your question. Who raise hands? Who's going first?
Okay, I will
Natalia?
go first. No,
All
this
right.
is Shonda.
All right. Okay. Yeah.
Here in Barbados, we have SBRC, and what they do is they what the coconut vendors do is they take the coconut husk to SBRC, and they shred the coconut, and then they mix it. They get salt from Portville. Portville is our sugar factory. So then they combine the two, and then you can buy the soil you can buy it by the ton. But I find they have this young guy here. He does his own potting mix, and we generally buy his potting mix, and they mix it for him. But then when they carry it to him, what he does, he adds his fungicides and bactericides, so that you won't get none of the pathogens when you plant the seed. And we find that it is very, very good. So here we
so you get good performance.
Utilize the coconut core to do what we have to do.
Right. That's excellent. That's excellent. So we need more stories like that. Natalia, you were saying something? Natalia is still there? Right. So like she disappeared. Right. Natalia, whenever you're ready, you can come back and ask your question or make your point. Right. So besides the coconut core, I think this is what the incident with the farmer there. I think that was an extremely good opportunity for us to do something like that, to do that, to use that utilize that as a material for potential planting of nurseries. All right. All the seaweed that we have throughout the Caribbean, I mean, a lot of entrepreneurs throughout the Caribbean, especially in places like St. Lucia, I know there's a young man who came up with this product, all right, and he actually gave it to the ministry in St. Lucia to actually test for him, right, in terms of the nutrients and all those things. And I'm not too sure what the findings were, but the thing is, we have so many opportunities to use things here that we have existing, and we have the seaweed infested so many of our beaches and causing so many problems, all right, with fish availability and all those things. So here are options we have for us to get into those activities of looking for renewable ingredients, all right, because you were saying something? You were saying something? I'm not too sure who that is. Right? Because the seaweed, for example, and talking about seaweed, I don't know if Nirvan here and Natai, I didn't get the permission for you all to go on the beach because the dean is of the opinion that the beach will be soon opened back by the Prime Minister on the 11th. So I don't know if you want to hold some strain again. Otherwise, I will try to see how best I could get that letter for you all to go and collect the seaweed. All right, because seaweed also has a number of other benefits. All right, it could be used as, we have had people here, Professor Jaya from FST. He has done a lot of work in using it as a bio fungicide. All right, and there are a lot of formulations that we could purchase from overseas. They sell at a lot of the agri shops that nutrient biostimulants. All right, using the seaweed and some other things as well. All right. Unfortunately, we don't have the bagasse like Barbados that we could use together with the coconut fiber to do these nice mixes. But there are so many options for us to use of renewable ingredients, right? But the conventional approach for propagation media is the drainage, aeration, moisture, which are paramount. And of course, you will get that all in the premix, which is, of course, not very sustainable. Right. All right, so I had, but I don't want to keep repeating myself, but propagation mixes, they include the peat moss, right? You have the perlite. Now, perlite can be used on its own, right? And I have seen people use it in their hydroponics. All right, just use it mainly for the larger crops like the tomato and the sweet pepper. They use just the perlite alone. Sand could be used as well. The vermiculite could be used on its own as well. Of course, compost and soil. And of course, you'll appreciate the fact that all of them have their advantages and disadvantages, and it being coarse, so the susceptibility to the diseases and all those things. Right? And supplemental fertility uses to compensate for nutrient deficiencies, to stimulate biological activity and nutrient liberation, and to alleviate plant stress, and as a growth accelerant. So that is why a lot of fertility supplemental fertility is added to some of these mixtures, these compost mixtures in particular. Right? We have anybody in this class who is doing work with Dr. Eudoxie looking at any biostimulants and the performance of crops? Anybody at all? Or who intend to do it? Nobody? Natalia, you're back as yet, and you.
Yeah, miss, I doing a thing using PGPRs. So
Okay.
I don't know. So we looking at how the hormone production of the PGPRs could promote better above ground growth for lettuce and reduce urea usage.
Oh, okay, that's interesting. Okay. All right. You start any work as yet, or you're still working on your design and everything?
I'm still working on my design because a lot of the stuff that are associated with the bacteria require like organic matter. So I'll work on what kind of medium to use.
Okay. All right. All right.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, that'll be interesting to hear your proposal presentation in the next couple of weeks to see what you decide to do. All right. Well, all these things are just general things that you should know for you. So you could run through these slides. Container formats. Well, I mentioned some of these things already, and I showed you the pictures of the cells, the cell plug trays, and I didn't talk about the advantages and disadvantages of them as opposed to the wooden flats. All right, but I told you the major uses of those flats are even not the plug trays so much, the wooden flats are when you have very small seeded crops and you plant them out, and then afterwards you as they germinate, you have to transplant them into these seedling trays. All right. All right. So in the next couple of weeks or so, I think I have to come and talk to you about cultural practices of sanitation and integrated pest management. So I will leave that for then. All right. So I'm trying to see if I could just quickly, because I have a next class right after. So I just want to get a little break. Right. So I'll be dealing with the cultural aspects of sanitation and all those things in week 8, so the next few weeks or so. All right. So I'll be coming back to cover that with you all. All right, so I wouldn't bother to get into all these things, good agricultural practices. So you all, I will post up these slides so that you'll have access to it. And of course, I will post up the recording for whoever missed the class today. All right, do you all have any questions as we end off? Concerns? All right, any of you over the lockdown started a business of doing your own nurseries to sell? What sorts of things you all did over the past 3 months? If anybody wants to share. Anybody want to share? Let me take off this. Who is Galaxy S8? I seen your mic on. Dana. Dana Sank. Yeah. Who is that?
I don't know if you hear me.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Oh, yeah, I'm the newcomer, Junior Bowler.
Oh, that's Junior. Oh, okay. All right, you got the link. All right, because I didn't check my phone. All right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, what happened?